Caleb Armstrong lived in a prison of his own making, though he wouldn't have called it that. Not then. His third-floor apartment in Atlanta was a box of plaster and peeling paint, its walls trembling with the city's ceaseless pulse. Car horns bleeding through cracked windows, neighbors shouting over the drone of a TV he couldn't mute, the hiss of steam rising from a vent he'd never located despite months of searching. At 32, he was lean. Not from discipline but from restless pacing. His frame whittled by nights spent tracing the edges of a life that felt too small. His dark hair hung in a tangle over eyes that carried a quiet ache, a hunger for something wilder, something beyond the fluorescent flicker of deadlines and screens. "I'd had enough," he'd say later, voice steady but shadowed by a tremor of memory. Enough of desks, of emails piling like debt, of noise that never stopped. Not even when I closed my eyes. I wanted quiet. Real quiet, and the swamp promised it. The Okefenokee Swamp had rooted itself in his imagination years before, a whisper from a library book he'd pored over as a child in a dusty schoolroom. Its name rolled off his tongue like a chant, Okefenokee, conjuring images of black water threading through cypress and sawgrass, a vastness that sprawled across 438,000 acres of southern Georgia like a wound healed over with wildness. He'd seen it in faded photographs. Channels snaking through peat islands, trees draped in Spanish moss like tattered veils, their reflections shimmering in a mirror of ink. It called to him through the years, a primal lure to a place where the city's clamor couldn't reach, where time bent under the weight of something older. In the autumn of 2003, with the leaves turning brittle and the air sharp with change, he decided to answer. He wasn't reckless, or so he told himself, though the lie would unravel soon enough. The trip took shape over weeks of meticulous planning, a ritual to quiet the doubts that gnawed at him. A solo canoe journey, a week to lose himself in the swamp's depths, to strip away the city's residue and find whatever lay beneath. His gear was sparse but deliberate, each item a talisman against the unknown. A lightweight canoe, its hull scratched from past rentals, rented from a shop that smelled of mildew and gasoline. A map creased into squares from folding and refolding, its edges frayed from late-night study under a flickering lamp. A compass that gleamed like a polished coin, its needle steady when his hands were not. A satellite phone he tested twice, its beep a lifeline tucked into a waterproof bag he strapped to his waist, and supplies packed tight into a weathered backpack. Dehydrated meals in foil pouches that rattled like dry leaves. A water filter with a hose that coiled like a snake. A sleeping bag rolled into a tight cylinder. A machete with a rubber grip that fit his palm too well. A handful of flares whose red caps promised rescue he hoped to never need. And a small notebook with a pencil stub, because some part of him still wanted to record what he found. He drove south from Atlanta on a Friday, the highway narrowing as civilization thinned, asphalt giving way to gravel that crunched under his tires. The city's skyline shrank in his rearview, replaced by pines that leaned over the road like mourners, their needles whispering in the wind. He reached the main visitor center by mid-morning, a low building of weathered cedar perched near a muddy ramp that sloped into the swamp, its roof sagging under the weight of time. The air hit him first, thick with peat and the faint tang of decay, a scent that carried both life and rot, heavy as a promise. He unloaded his gear under a sky heavy with gray, the canoe thudding softly as it settled on the bank, its bow nosing the water like a hound scenting prey. A ranger lingered nearby, a wiry man with a clipboard and a face carved from years of sun and silence. He eyed Caleb's setup, canoe, pack, the machete clipped to his belt, with a flicker of doubt that didn't reach his voice. "Stick to the marked channels," the man said, his rasp like sandpaper on wood. "Gets dark fast out there. And quiet. Quieter than you're used to." Caleb nodded, forcing a grin that felt too tight. "Got it. Just looking for some peace." The ranger didn't smile back, just turned away, his boots crunching gravel as he retreated to the building, leaving Caleb to wonder if the warning carried weight he hadn't yet grasped. He launched at noon, paddle dipping into water that gleamed like oil, rippling outward in slow, hypnotic waves that lapped against the ramp. The swamp swallowed him whole. The visitor center shrank to a speck, then vanished behind a curtain of cypress and sawgrass, its silhouette erased by green and shadow. The first stroke felt like freedom, the second like defiance, each pull of the paddle a severing of ties to the life he'd left. He paddled steady, the canoe cutting through a channel flanked by trees whose roots, cypress knees, jutted from the surface like knotted bones, their surfaces slick with moss that glistened in the weak light. Spanish moss swayed overhead, brushing the water with ghostly fingers, and the sky peeked through in slivers, a patchwork of cloud and faint sun that dappled the black below. He breathed deep, the city's hum fading to a memory, replaced by the swamp's own rhythm. A frog's croak, sharp and sudden, cutting the stillness. An insect's whine threading through the air like a needle. The distant splash of something. A fish, a turtle, a gator, sliding into the dark. "This is it," he muttered, the words a tether to himself, a lifeline in the vastness. "This is what I came for." The first day stretched long and quiet, a slow unspooling of time he hadn't known he craved. He navigated narrow waterways, the map spread across his lap, its lines blurring as sweat stung his eyes and dripped onto the paper. The swamp unfolded in layers, shallow pools reflecting the canopy in fractured shards, islands of peat and grass rising like humps from the black, the occasional alligator drifting past, its eyes glinting like polished stones before sinking out of sight with a flick of its tail. He stopped once, mid-afternoon, on a hummock, a mound of peat and tangled roots barely above the water, to stretch his legs, the ground spongy and yielding under his boots, sucking at his soles with each step. He ate a granola bar, its sweetness cloying against the swamp's sour tang, and sipped from a canteen that tasted faintly of metal. The map lay open beside him, his finger tracing the route. A channel here, a bend there, 5 miles in by his guess, though distance felt fluid, measured more in effort than miles. That night, he camped on a raised platform. A wooden square bolted above the muck, its planks warped and darkened by years of damp, its edges fringed with reeds that swayed like specters in the breeze. He built a small fire, its smoke curling into the dusk, the crackle of twigs a counterpoint to the swamp's hum. Dinner was a foil pouch of chili, heated over the flames, its taste of salt and regret swallowed with grim determination. Lying back, he watched stars prick through the canopy, their light faint against the swamp's vast dark, and felt the quiet seep into him. A balm, a reset, a promise kept. Sleep came slow, the platform creaking beneath his weight, the swamp whispering secrets he couldn't yet hear. A splash too close, a rustle in the reeds, sounds he dismissed as the wilds settling into night. He didn't know then that the swamp was already watching, its gaze patient, unblinking, waiting for him to step deeper into its embrace. Interactive question. Have you ever stood at the edge of a wild place, feeling it pull you in with both promise and threat? What would you carry, physically or in your mind, to face its shadows? The second day dawned gray and heavy, the mist a shroud that clung to the water's skin, softening the edges of the world into a dreamlike haze. Caleb woke stiff, the sleeping bag damp with condensation and sweat, his breath fogging in the chill as he rolled it tight and stowed it in the canoe. The platform creaked under his boots as he broke camp, the fire's ashes cold and scattered, the air thick with the swamp's scent, peat, rot, a faint sweetness of decaying leaves. He pushed off, the canoe's hull scraping the wood with a groan, and paddled into a channel that twisted like a vein through the swamp's heart. The paddle felt good in his hands, its rhythm a steady pulse against the quiet. A dip, a pull, a glide that carried him deeper into the labyrinth. The cypress trees rose taller here, their trunks thick and gnarled, bark peeling in strips that hung like flayed skin, draped in Spanish moss that swayed like funeral shrouds in a breeze he barely felt. The water mirrored the sky, black and still, broken only by the ripple of his wake or the sudden dart of a fish beneath the surface, its silver flash swallowed by the dark. He moved with purpose, the map a constant companion spread across his lap, its creases smudged from his fingers, its lines a guide through the maze of channels and islands. The swamp was alive, a breathing thing. Shallow pools glinted with reflected light, their surfaces trembling with the passage of unseen creatures. Peat hummocks loomed then receded, their edges fringed with sawgrass that sliced the air like blades. Alligators drifted past, their snouts cutting the water like knives, eyes glowing briefly before sinking into the black with a flick of their tails. He saw life everywhere, a tapestry of motion and sound that wove itself around him. A heron stalked the shallows, its legs thin as reeds, beak poised like a dagger over the water, waiting for a fish to stray too close. A turtle basked on a fallen log, its shell a mosaic of algae and thyme, head tilted toward a sun it couldn't reach through the clouds. Frogs croaked in jagged bursts, their calls a chorus that rose and fell like waves, while insects hummed a high, ceaseless note that threaded through the stillness, a drone that buzzed in his ears until he barely noticed it. "It's alive," he thought, a grin tugging at his lips. The city's sterile hum a distant memory, more alive than anything back home. Messy, loud, real. By noon, the mist had burned off, leaving a sky of bruised clouds that pressed low, their edges tinged with a sickly yellow. He stopped on another hummock, a mound of peat and tangled roots barely above the water, its surface spongy and slick with damp. His legs ached as he stretched them, boots sinking into the ground with a wet squelch, the swamp reluctant to release him. He ate a granola bar, its sweetness cloying against the sour tang that coated his tongue, and sipped from his canteen, the water tasting faintly of the filter's plastic. The map lay open beside him, his finger tracing the route he'd carved. 5 miles from the visitor center, maybe 6, though the swamp warped distance into something elastic, measured in paddle strokes and sweat rather than miles. He squinted at the horizon, a wall of green and shadow where channels branched into dead ends, and felt the swamp seep into him. Its stillness a balm, its wildness a mirror to a part of himself he'd forgotten, a hunger he couldn't name. The afternoon stretched long, the paddle's rhythm a metronome to his thoughts. He navigated a channel flanked by cypress knees that jutted like teeth, their surfaces slick with moss that glistened in the weak light, and past an island where sawgrass swayed like a field of knives, its tips catching the wind with a hiss. The swamp's beauty was undeniable, raw, unpolished, a landscape that cared nothing for human eyes, but beneath it lay a pulse he couldn't ignore. A whisper in the water, a tremor in the air, a sense that the quiet was a mask for something deeper. He shook it off, muttering to himself, "Just your head playing tricks, Caleb. Too much silence after all that noise." The words felt thin, a thread of bravado fraying against the vastness. The second night, he chose another platform, this one older, its wood darkened by rot and etched with scratches he couldn't read, names, dates, marks left by hands long gone. Its edges were fringed with reeds that swayed like specters, their tips brushing the water with a sound like a sigh. He built a fire again, the flames crackling against the damp, their light dancing on the cypress trunks that loomed around him like sentinels. Dinner was a pouch of beef stew, heated over the fire until it bubbled, its warmth seeping into his hands as he ate, the taste of salt and meat a fleeting comfort against the swamp's sour edge. The chorus swelled, frogs in full throat, their calls a jagged wave that rolled through the dark, crickets weaving a drone that pulsed in his ears, the occasional bellow of a gator, deep and resonant, vibrating through the water and into his bones. He lay back, the platform creaking under his weight, and let the sounds wash over him, a tide that carried him towards sleep. "This is freedom," he whispered, the words swallowed by the night, a declaration to no one but himself. Sleep came fitful, fractured by dreams of water and shadow, of something moving just beyond the fire's glow. He woke once, startled by a splash too close, too deliberate, and peered into the dark, the embers casting a faint orange on the reeds. "Just a fish," he muttered, though the lie sat heavy, a stone in his gut. He rolled over, pulling the sleeping bag tighter, and drifted back into uneasy rest. The swamp was alive, yes, but it watched him too. Its gaze patient, unblinking, a presence he felt but couldn't see, waiting for him to notice the cracks in its quiet. The third night began like the others, the platform a familiar perch in the swamp's vast dark, 5 miles from the visitor center, a distance that felt both close and unreachable in the labyrinth of channels. Caleb settled in, the sleeping bag damp with sweat and dew, its fabric clinging to his skin as he shifted for comfort. The fire had burned low, reduced to embers that pulsed like dying stars, their light flickering on the reeds that fringed the platform's edge. He'd grown accustomed to the swamp sounds, frogs croaking in jagged waves that rose and fell like breath, insects threading their hum through the stillness, the splash of a gator or a fish breaking the surface with a wet slap. They lulled him, a rhythm he'd come to trust, a chorus that anchored him in the wild. But around midnight, that trust shattered, splintering into a silence that descended like a guillotine. The sound stopped, abruptly, completely. No frogs, no crickets, no rustle of reeds in the faint breeze that brushed his face. The silence was a weight, thick and suffocating, pressing against his chest until he could hear his own heartbeat thudding in his ears, a frantic drum against the void. He sat up, breath shallow, the sleeping bag rustling loud in the hush, its sound jarring in a world stripped of noise. He'd read about this in nature guides, how a predator's presence could hush an ecosystem, its shadow a mute command over the wild, silencing the small and the skittish. A gator, maybe, stalking the shallows, or a panther padding through the sawgrass on silent paws. But this felt different, deeper, wrong, as if the swamp itself had paused, holding its breath for something older, something that didn't fit the rules he'd learned in books or the rangers' clipped warnings. He waited, ears straining, the silence stretching taut as a wire pulled to breaking. His hands fumbled for the machete beside his bag, its rubber grip cold against his palm, the blade's edge catching the faint glow of the embers. He tilted his head, trying to catch any sound. A rustle, a splash, a breath. But the swamp offered nothing, its stillness a wall he couldn't breach. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of peat and rot, and a chill crept up his spine, prickling the hairs on his neck. He'd felt alone before, in the city's crowded isolation, but this was different. This was a solitude that watched, that waited, that knew he was there. Then it came, a thumping, low and rhythmic, rolling through the dark from somewhere distant, a drumbeat pulsing against the silence. It was faint at first, a murmur on the edge of hearing, and he leaned forward, straining to pin its source. North, maybe, or west, the channel's twisted sound, bending it into echoes that danced on the water, mocking his sense of direction. The thumping grew louder, closer, but erratic, speeding into a frantic tattoo that hammered his skull, then slowing to a crawl, each beat a deliberate thud that vibrated through the platform and into his bones. It stopped entirely, leaving the silence to rush back, only to start again minutes later, a cycle that gnawed at his nerves. He forced a laugh, voice brittle and thin. Some lunatics throwing a swamp rave out there, right? The humor died fast, souring in his throat, a feeble shield against the dread coiling in his gut. He stood, machete in hand, and peered into the dark, the embers glow too weak to pierce the mist that clung to the water. That's when he saw it. A shape moving in the channel near the platform, outlined by a sliver of moonlight that pierced the clouds like a blade. 6 feet long, low and sinuous, it undulated through the water, not gliding like an alligator with its mechanical grace, but rippling, fluid and unnatural, like a giant otter or a seal twisted into something alien, something that didn't belong in the Okefenokee's taxonomy. His knuckles whitened around the machete, the blade trembling as he watched, breath held tight in his chest. The thing slipped beneath the surface, leaving only a ripple that lapped against the platform's supports, a gentle wave that carried a weight he couldn't name. The wood swayed, a subtle lurch, as if brushed by something below, something alive, something deliberate. Just the current, he whispered, though the water lay still as glass, its mirror unbroken, reflecting a sky that offered no answers. He didn't sleep. The thumping wove through the night, sporadic, relentless, a thread of unease he couldn't cut, couldn't silence. He sat up, machete across his lap, eyes darting to every shadow, every ripple that broke the water's skin. The swamp's beauty had peeled back, revealing a pulse he couldn't name, a hunger, a patience that waited beyond the fire's dying light. He tried to reason it away. A fish, A log caught in some unseen flow, a trick of the mind after days of solitude. But the explanations crumbled, dust in his hands, as the thumping pulsed on, now fast, now slow, a heartbeat that wasn't his own. Dawn crept in gray and slow, the mist rising like smoke from the water, a veil that hid whatever watched from the dark. He made his choice. Peace wasn't worth this, whatever this was. He packed fast, hands trembling as he stuffed gear into the canoe, the hull scraping the platform with a groan as he shoved off. The swamp watched, silent now, its secrets coiled tight, waiting for him to turn his back. Morning broke heavy and bleak, the mist a shroud that clung to the water's skin, softening the cypress into specters that loomed through the haze. Caleb paddled hard, the canoe cutting through the black with a hiss, each stroke a counterpoint to the dread coiling in his gut, a snake tightening around his ribs. The air reeked of decay, rotting wood, stagnant pools, the swamp's slow digestion of itself. And it thickened as he moved, a sour tang that coated his tongue and burned his throat. He felt it then, eyes on his back, unseen, tracking him through the labyrinth of channels, a gaze that prickled his skin and quickened his pulse. The map lay crumpled in the canoe's bow, its creases smeared with sweat, useless now. He knew the way, or thought he did, the visitor center, a beacon 5 miles off, a lifeline in the gloom. But distance felt fluid, warped by the swamp's indifference, each paddle stroke stretching the miles into an eternity he couldn't measure. An hour in, the mist parted, a curtain torn by the wind, and a shape bobbed ahead. A log, he thought, its edges blurred by the haze, its surface slick with damp. Closer, it resolved into a body. A man, face down, arms splayed like a broken doll tossed into the water. The uniform was unmistakable. A park ranger, its green fabric soaked dark, clinging to skin gray and bloated from days submerged, puckered and pale as if the swamp had begun to claim it. Caleb's breath hitched, the paddle faltering in his hands as he leaned over the canoe's edge, the satellite phone trembling in his grip, its plastic slick with sweat. The man's back bore deep gashes, parallel, evenly spaced, claw marks that tore through cloth and flesh with jagged brutality. The edges ragged and frayed, the wounds deep enough to glimpse bone beneath. No blood seeped now, just the swamp's dark stain, a black ichor that filled the cuts like ink. He didn't touch it, didn't dare, circled wide, the canoe rocking as he steered clear, the sight a brand on his mind. Strength, not precision, had done this, something massive, something that didn't care about silence or stealth, something that left its mark and moved on. The swamp closed in tighter, channels narrowing until the cypress roots clawed at the water like skeletal hands, their tips brushing the canoe's hull with a scrape that set his teeth on edge. The air thickened, stifling, a weight that pressed against his chest, and the silence from the night lingered. No birds sang, no insects buzzed, just the splash of his paddle, loud as a gunshot in the hush, echoing off the trees like a plea. He paddled faster, sweat stinging his eyes, dripping into the water with faint plinks that vanished into the black. The visitor center was close. He told himself that, clung to it, but the swamp stretched that hope thin, its channels twisting into a maze that mocked his memory. Around a bend, another body snagged his gaze. A woman this time, half submerged, caught in a tangle of roots near the bank. Her form slumped as if dropped there by careless hands. Her face was a mask of terror, eyes wide and unseeing, mouth frozen in a silent scream that echoed in his skull. Her arms were shredded, skin flayed in strips that dangled like ribbons, muscle glistening wetly, bone stark and white against the dark roots that cradled her. Caleb gagged, while rising sharp and hot, the paddle slipping in his grip as he fought to keep moving. He thought to turn back, a fleeting impulse born of panic. But to what? The floating ranger, his back a map of claw marks? The thumping that had haunted the night? Forward was his only path, the visitor center his only chance. He rowed harder, arms burning, the canoe slicing through the murk with a desperation that rocked its frame. Then he heard it, movement behind him, fast, too fast for an alligator's lazy drift. Water churned, a wake cutting the surface like a blade, ripples spreading outward to lap against the roots. He glanced back, seeing only the mist and the black, But the sound grew. Splashes, sharp and deliberate. A rhythm that matched the thumping from the dark. His paddle bit deeper, each stroke a scream against the silence. His breath ragged as the swamp's beauty vanished. Its stillness a lie peeled away to reveal teeth waiting in the deep. The channels converged into a clearing, a wide pool where the water lay still, the mist thinning to reveal cypress spires against a bruised sky that hung low and heavy. Caleb stopped, chest heaving, the paddle resting across his knees as he caught his breath, hands raw and blistered from the grip. Sweat stung his eyes, streaking his face, his shirt clinging damp to his skin. The swamp's chorus was gone. No frogs, no insects, just the faint moan of wind through the trees and the thud of his own pulse in his ears. That's when it surfaced 20 yards away, rising like a nightmare sculpted from the swamp's depths, a shape that defied the light and the logic he'd clung to. Long and sinuous, its body gleamed with dark, slick scales that caught the weak sun in oily glints, each plate overlapping like armor forged from the black water itself. Its limbs were short but clawed, muscular as steel cables coiled tight, ending in talons that curved like sickles, their tips glinting faintly as if honed by centuries in the murk. Its head was the worst. Canine yet crocodilian, elongated and wrong. A snout that stretched too far, lined with teeth that jutted unevenly, jagged as broken glass, too many for the mouth that held them. Rows of fangs overlapped, some piercing its own flesh, others curling outward like barbs, and its eyes, black, unblinking, bottomless, locked on him with a predator's certainty. Not the canoe, not his gear, but him, a gaze that stripped away the paddle, the machete, the flares, leaving only the raw truth. He was prey. He froze, breath shallow, the machete useless in its sheath, its blade a child's toy against this thing. It stared, absolute and unyielding, a presence that filled the clearing with a weight he couldn't name. A hunger, a patience, a promise of what waited if he faltered. The canoe rocked as he gripped the paddle, rowing with a frenzy that sent water splashing over the sides, the hull trembling under the strain. The thing watched, sinking back into the black with a silence that mocked his panic, its scales vanishing beneath the surface like a shadow swallowed by night. Hope flickered. Maybe he'd outrun it, maybe it had lost interest, until a sudden jolt struck the hull, a thud that nearly tipped him into the murk, the canoe lurching as if seized by unseen hands. Below, a dark blur moved, pacing him, its shape distorted by the water's lens, claws glinting faintly as it brushed the hull again. Testing, teasing, playing with its catch. He paddled harder, arms screaming, shoulders burning as muscle tore against bone, the canoe cutting a desperate path through the clearing. The swamp roared in his ears, whined through the cypress, water against the hull, his own ragged gasps, a cacophony that drowned the silence and fueled his flight. He glanced down, seeing the blur shift, its form weaving beneath the canoe, a predator's dance that promised no escape. The visitor center was close now, a mile, maybe less, but the swamp stretched that distance into an abyss, each stroke a plea against the inevitable. The creature didn't surface again, but its presence lingered, a weight in the water, a shadow in his mind, a certainty that it could take him whenever it chose. He paddled until his hands bled, until the platform's edge loomed through the mist, a lifeline in the gloom, its wooden bulk a fragile shield against the thing that hunted him. Dusk swallowed the swamp as Caleb reached the visitor center, its wooden bulk a ghost in the fading light, its windows dark as empty sockets staring into the mist. He stumbled from the canoe, legs trembling, hands blistered and bleeding, the paddle clattering to the ground as he lurched toward shore. His throat was raw from shouts that had gone unanswered, pleas swallowed by the swamp's indifference. The place stood deserted, doors locked tight, the ranger's truck gone, the ramp slick with mud that sucked at his boots. He fired a flare, its red arc streaking into the sky, a fleeting scream against the dark, but it vanished into the clouds, unanswered, unheeded. His truck waited nearby, a battered lifeline in the gloom, its keys shaking in his hand as he fumbled them from his pocket. He loaded gear with frantic haste, the canoe abandoned on the bank, its hull scarred from the flight. The engine roared to life, tires spitting mud as he fled, the swamp receding in his rear view, its shadows clinging to his mind like damp moss, a stain he couldn't wash away. Days later, a news report flickered across his TV. A missing ranger, his boat found adrift in a channel, its hull unmarked but empty, his body unrecovered, lost to the black water. No mention of the woman, her shredded arms and terror-frozen face erased from the record, as if the swamp had claimed her story too. Caleb dug deeper, unearthing whispers from the edges of lore. The Rougarou, a water-dwelling hunter, ancient and vicious, tied to the Okefenokee's dark history. Some called it a relic, a dinosaur's kin that defied extinction, its scales a remnant of a world long buried. Others saw it as supernatural, a spirit born from the swamp's black heart, a guardian or a curse. He read accounts, fragmented, faded, of fishermen gone missing, their boats found splintered, of hunters who spoke of shapes in the water, of eyes that watched from the deep. He sees it still, those scales, those claws, those eyes. When the world quiets, a memory that haunts the edges of sleep, a shadow that moves behind closed lids. The swamp keeps its secrets, a vastness that offers no answers, only questions that echo in the dark. He wonders, was he spared or marked? A warning, perhaps, from a ranger who'd seen too much, whose gashed back was a message Caleb now carries. Never enter the swamp at night, never trust its quiet, never look too long into its depths. The Okefenokee remains, a mirror of black water and cypress, beautiful and merciless, waiting for the next soul to paddle into its embrace.